wanted to hurt him with a quick hookup. Now I'm the one living with regret. I used to think I was in control of everything. I believed that my beauty and charm could open any door I wanted and close the ones I no longer needed. I thought hurting Richard with a quick fling would prove something to me, that it would make me feel alive again. But now, I sit with the weight of regret pressing down on me, heavier than I ever imagined. If I had known how far my choices would take me, I would have held on tighter to what I once had instead of throwing it away. Looking back, it's almost strange to remember how it all began, how I first met Richard. It was at a friend's baby shower. The house was nicely decorated and people were chatting with each other. I was not even planning to go, but my friend insisted, and that single decision changed my life. Richard was there, standing quietly near the drinks table, wearing a simple shirt that made him look neat and approachable. There was nothing flashy about him, but something about his calmness drew me in. Guys, he was sweet in a way that was uncommon among men at the time. He was the kind of person who opened doors and made others feel at ease. He spoke in a respectful manner, not too loud or soft, but firm enough to demonstrate his self-confidence. My friends used to say that men like that were rare, but I was lucky to discover someone special. I met my husband at the age of 25. My husband Richard was a promising young man of 27. At that baby shower where we met, he carried himself with so much grace. He helped the host serve drinks, cleared plates when people were done, and made sure everyone had a good time. I noticed how every guest admired him. I did not know much about him then, but I saw enough to know he was someone to be valued. Over time, we began to see more of each other. Our first conversations were brief, with simple discussions about work, family, and life. He had a quiet way of listening that made me feel important, even when I was rambling about small matters. I gradually came to appreciate that he was not only sweet, but also focused and hardworking. He owned a small company at the time, and despite its small size, he was proud of it. He discussed his vision for the company and how he wanted to build something solid that would last. I admired that drive. I liked the way he woke up early, how he planned his days carefully, and how he valued discipline. He was not the type to chase after unnecessary things. He lived within his means, but he also had a vision for more. To me, that balance made him stand out. When we started dating, he treated me with utmost care. He was respectful of my choices, but he also guided me in small ways. He made sure I ate well, reminded me about little things like getting enough rest, and always asked if I felt safe. I had dated men before who only cared about what they could take, but Richard cared about what he could give. That was rare, and it melted me. Guys, our relationship moved faster than I expected. Within months, we became serious. My friends noticed how he respected me, and they said I had found a good man. They were right. Richard was not perfect, but he was enough. He was the kind of man who thought of tomorrow and worked toward it. I knew his company was his pride, and I also knew he wanted to build a family that would make him proud. He proposed exactly 6 months of dating. When he proposed marriage, I did not hesitate. I felt lucky, and I was sure I was making the right choice. Our wedding was not the most extravagant, but it was filled with love. People kept saying I had chosen well, that Richard was a man who would never abandon his family, and that I would live in peace with him. I believed every word of it. At the start of our marriage, everything seemed like a dream. Richard worked hard, and the company continued to grow. He ensured that we lacked nothing. He paid the bills, kept the house clean, and provided me with the comfort that every woman desired. He was still that sweet man from the beginning. People who visited us admired how caring he was. But something inside me was restless. Richard offered me stability, but I desired more. I desired excitement, luxury, and a life that was more vibrant than Richard's quiet, steady existence. At the time, I didn't realize the danger of that desire. I just saw it as me wanting to enjoy my youth. I wanted more than just comfort. I wanted a life that appeared glamorous. Most of my friends lived loudly, buying expensive clothes, going to clubs, changing hairstyles every month, and traveling solely to post pictures online. I compared myself to them and felt compelled to keep up. Despite Richard's best efforts, I wished he had given me more money. I began asking him for bigger amounts, not because I lacked the basics, but because I wanted luxury. I wanted to wear the best, hold the latest designer bags, and show off at parties. Richard at first gave me what I asked for. He believed in making me happy, but the more he gave, the more I wanted more. Weekends became a time for me to party with my girls. I spent long nights dancing, drinking, and showing off new clothes. I told myself it was harmless fun, that I deserved to enjoy life while I was still young. Richard stayed home most of those nights, tired from work or busy with his business plans. I barely noticed his exhaustion. I only cared about keeping up with the lifestyle I thought I deserved. We continued like this for 3 years. During those years, Richard began to express his worry. He told me that the way I spent money was too much. He complained that I was asking for amounts that did not make sense, amounts that were draining him. He explained that the business needed reinvestment and that we had to manage what we had so that things could grow. But I was not interested in managing. I thought he was simply being stingy. Guys, rather than adjusting, I hardened my heart. I told myself that his business was not my problem. I wanted to live a certain way, and if he couldn't meet it, I would look for alternatives. I started to look at Richard differently. I began to believe he was holding me back, that he was going bankrupt, and that I was wasting my youth on him. We began to argue more frequently. Each time he questioned why I was spending so much, I became defensive. I would remind him that I needed to maintain my beauty, that appearances mattered, and that he should not complain as long as he was my husband. I spoke carelessly, forgetting that he was the same man who had built a home for me and provided for me without fail from the start. Even when Richard tried to explain calmly that the company was facing challenges and that he needed to cut costs, I was not moved. I saw his complaints as weakness. To me, he was failing in his duty as a man if he could not keep up with my demands. I thought beauty was an investment he should always pay for, because it was part of what made me valuable to him. That mindset drove me to a dangerous path. Instead of cutting back and supporting him through the tough times, I started thinking of how to get money elsewhere. My friends encouraged me in ways that were not helpful. They made it sound normal to have another man on the side who could provide what my husband could not. They told me it was a smart choice, not betrayal. I believed them. Little by little, I began to live 2 lives. At home, I was the wife Richard still trusted, though he was beginning to question me more. Outside, I was the woman who wanted to shine brighter, who wanted more than what her husband was giving. I told myself I deserved it, that Richard would never know, and that even if he did, it would not matter. I was wrong. Richard was not failing. He was only a man working hard to keep a company alive while carrying a family on his back. He needed support, not criticism. He needed a wife who could stand with him, not one who compared him to others and looked down on him. But at that time, I was too consumed by my own desires to see it. That was the stage of our marriage where I turned away from everything we once shared. It was the beginning of my biggest mistake, the point where I started looking outside my home for what I thought I needed. At one of the girls' hangouts, I met Vincent. He was everything Richard was not, at least in the way I measured value at that time. Vincent lived large. He dressed in expensive clothes, carried himself like someone who had no worries, and always seemed to have money to throw around. Where Richard was steady and disciplined, Vincent was flashy and carefree. At that stage in my life, that was what caught my eye. I was already feeling frustrated with Richard's complaints about my spending, and I was very open to distraction. Vincent noticed me quickly, and he wasted no time giving me the attention I felt I deserved. He showered me with compliments, told me I looked like a queen, and ordered drinks without blinking. I was enticed. I liked how easily he spent money, and how he made everything seem fun and effortless. It started with small outings, lunches that turned into dinners, casual meetups that became more frequent. Before long, I found myself sneaking out of the house at odd hours. I told Richard I was meeting friends or attending events, but in reality, I was with Vincent. Weekends that should have been spent with my husband turned into hotel stays with my new partner. The thrill of it made me blind to the damage I was causing. Richard began to notice the changes in me. He saw how I would return home late, how my phone buzzed at odd hours. He asked questions I brushed aside easily. I told him I needed to maintain my beauty and that he was simply too focused on money problems. I said I could not sit around waiting for him to revive his business while my friends were out enjoying their lives. My words were harsh, but at that time I did not care how they landed. For 4 months, I lived this double life. Vincent took me to places Richard never did. He bought me gifts, took pictures with me, and sent messages that made me feel special. I kept those pictures and messages on my phone, careless of what might happen if Richard saw them. Deep inside, I thought I was untouchable. I believed that no matter what, Richard would never leave me because I was his wife, the woman he once adored. But Richard was not blind. He saw the romantic messages, the photos of me and Vincent together, the evidence I did not even bother to hide properly. Still, he did not explode immediately. He asked me gently at first why I was always out, who Vincent was, why my lifestyle had changed so much. Instead of telling the truth, I defended my actions with more pride. I told him he was going broke and that I could not afford to lose my beauty just because he was struggling. Those words cut him, but I refused to see it. I convinced myself that he was simply jealous, that he could not stand the fact that another man was giving me what he could not. In my mind, I was the one making the smart choice, while Richard was the one failing as a man. I thought Vincent was my upgrade, the man who could give me everything Richard could not. I did not realize I was destroying myself while I laughed at the idea of destroying Richard. Every time Vincent took me out, I felt powerful, like I had escaped the quiet life my husband offered. But the truth was that Vincent only offered me illusions. He offered me dinners, outings, and empty promises, while Richard had offered me stability, respect, and real love. My relationship with Vincent grew bolder. There were weekends when I didn't bother hiding. I'd tell Richard I was spending time with my girlfriends, but I was actually in a hotel room with Vincent. I began treating Richard as if he were invisible, just another man in the same house as me. I thought I was untouchable because I always went home to him at the end of the day. Richard's silence during those months made me think he was weak. I mistook his patience for foolishness. I told myself he could never do anything, that he was too gentle, too respectful, too tied to me to ever let me go. I was wrong. His silence was not weakness. It was the calm before everything fell apart. The affair lasted 2 months, but in those 2 months I destroyed years of marriage. I threw away trust, loyalty, and respect for moments of pleasure with a man who never truly valued me. At that time, I could not see the damage. I could only see the expensive meals, the nice clothes, the attention. I told myself I was winning, when in reality, I was digging a hole that I would never climb out of. One of those opportunities came when he was introduced to a bigger company that was ready to partner with him. It was supposed to be the kind of deal that could lift his business again. He prepared himself carefully, gathered his documents, and walked into that office with hope. But what he did not know was that fate had arranged something that would crush him even before the meeting began. The day Richard went out to secure a contract that could have saved his company, only to find out that Vincent was the man on the other side of the deal. That was when my hidden life came crashing into the open, and I realized too late that I had pushed things too far, but never felt sorry. When he stepped into the office, he saw Vincent, the same Vincent who had been my secret escape, the man who had been sending me messages late at night and taking me out every weekend. The look on Richard's face, as he later told me, was one of shock. He had not expected to find his rival in the position of power he desperately needed, but he composed himself. I was there too. I had gone to see Vincent that same day, not knowing Richard would walk in. I walked out of Vincent's restroom adjusting my dress. When our eyes met, I felt a wave of shame, but I buried it quickly. I pretended not to know him, turning my face as though he was just another man in the room. It was cruel, and I regret it now, but at that moment I thought silence was the best way to protect myself. The meeting went on, but my presence ruined everything. Richard presented his proposal, explaining how his company could handle the contract, but Vincent was not convinced, and I made it worse. At one point, Richard excused himself for a few minutes, and Vincent turned to me with questions. He asked me directly what I thought of Richard's ability to manage the project. I could have defended him. I could have stood by my husband, reminded Vincent that Richard was capable and hardworking. Instead, I chose pride. I told Vincent to his face that I did not think he was competent enough for the work. I said those words without thinking about the damage they would cause. To me, It was just a way of protecting my place with Vincent, of showing him I was on his side. Richard was right behind the door when I made those statements. To Richard, those words were the final blow. It was not just that I had betrayed him with another man. It was that I openly destroyed his chance to save the business he had worked so hard to build. It was the peak of my cheating, the moment when I crossed a line that could never be erased. Richard left that office without the contract. Vincent did not award him the deal, and I was the reason. I had torn down the little hope he had left with my own words. At that moment, I did not care. I told myself Richard would survive, that he was too emotional, and that I was only speaking the truth. But in reality, I had broken something that would never be fixed again. When Richard got home that evening, he sat for a while to put his thoughts together and concluded that the meeting with Vincent marked the end. Richard could not take it anymore. It was one thing to cheat behind his back, but another thing entirely to humiliate him in front of the man who was both his rival and my affair partner. That was the day he decided he was done, even though I did not realize it yet. He settled down that evening and packed all my belongings, both big and small. He put them in the garage. It's been a month since that incident at Vincent's office. I knew I was guilty, so I thought by the time I come back home, life will go on normal, but I was wrong. Totally wrong. When I entered our compound, I sighted my boxes at the garage. Instead of thinking about what would have caused it, I angrily knocked at the door and immediately Richard opened. I asked why my boxes were outside, but he didn't reply immediately. He turned to his reading table and picked up a brown envelope, which he handed to me, and said he was done with this marriage. I burst into a very sarcastic laughter. I opened the envelope. In it, I saw the messages and pictures of me and Vincent. That got me scared, but instead of feeling remorseful, I signed the divorce papers without thinking. I threw the envelope at him and said I was finally free from the hands of a broken man. That was the end of our marriage. There was no plea, nor were there arguments. I went out of the living room to the compound, packed my things to the gate, and called a cab. I told my rider to take me to Vincent's house. I got to Vincent's house and knocked at the door. I adjusted my dress as I waited for the door to open. The door was opened by Vincent, and he smiled as he saw me, but his smile reduced as he saw my luggages. He asked why I bought my boxes, and I said I just couldn't live a day without him casually. He smiled and let me in. Vincent kept smiling, but it was obvious he was not comfortable with my stay. After a week, he told me I was going to excuse him for the week that he had a business meeting. I asked why a business meeting should be held in his house and why my presence is not needed. He could not explain, but just said, I have to leave. They left the house for a 2-day trip and asked me to be gone before he returned. I didn't leave the house, and when he returned to the house, he came back with a lady and 2 kids, a boy and a girl. I was confused, so I asked who they were, and he quickly introduced them to me as his family and introduced me to them as the maid. I felt so insulted and ashamed of myself. I decided to stay there for a while to figure out what next, but I left the next day, since I couldn't hold tears back from my eyes whenever I heard the kids call him Dad. I moved in with one of my girls, Sharon. She welcomed me well. I didn't tell her exactly what happened. I just said I needed space. We still went on girls' night with the change I had to my other account that my ex-husband was not aware of. I continued living like nothing had happened, but deep down, I knew I had destroyed 3 years with a few months. Sharon and I kept living in peace till I could no longer afford groceries and other things for the house. She had to send me packing when she discovered I was broke. I had to leave that evening, and I wandered on the street that evening till I saw a small apartment. I begged the landlady to let me pay half of the rent, then I pay the balance later. I stayed there in silence for the first few weeks. After a month, I went to look for a job so I could survive. I searched for weeks, but I got nothing. It was then that I realized the saying is true. You don't know what you have until you lose it. Update. Hello, Redditors. It's been exactly 6 months since all things have been falling apart with me. Thankfully, I got a job with a cleaning company. One day, my cleaning company sent me to a new place. They gave me the address. When I got there and saw the name on the gate, my heart almost stopped. It was Richard's house. For a moment, I wanted to run away, but I needed the money and feared losing my job. I knocked on the door, and a calm, beautiful lady opened. She was Richard's girlfriend. Richard came out looking stronger than before. For a few seconds, there was a moment of silence between us. The lady noticed it and asked if we knew each other. Richard said I was his ex. Then he told her he was glad I had left, because it gave him the chance to be with someone who truly cared for him. His words cut deep. My hands shook as I cleaned. His girlfriend was kind, but I felt ashamed the whole time. When I finished and got home, I cried for hours. I saw clearly that my beauty had given me pride, but no real future. Without wisdom, beauty meant nothing. Guys, y'all will not believe that Richard gave me a bad review. He told the agency that I was poor at my job. Using his influence, he got me sacked. I was very devastated and angry. I kept asking what exactly I did that he took this job away from me. Then I realized that it was his little way of paying me back for how I made him lose a contract. I honestly deserve that. Looking back, I see my mistakes clearly. I lost my husband because I was too proud to meet him halfway. I lost my friends because I carried pride like a crown no one wanted. I lost my lifestyle because I thought it would last without effort. What stayed with me was regret, and for a long time it ate me up inside. In a twinkle of an eye, my life changed from good to bad. There's no justification for what I did. It's so unfortunate that I have to deal with the consequences of my actions. Life was sweet with Richard, but I foolishly chose to be on the street.